back, YouTubers. Mark here again with ExoticCar Play Place. Today I want to do a follow-up video on the top 6 things that went wrong on my last installation when I put in the fuel filters for my 2005 Lamborghini Gallardo. And I want to show you the 6 things that went wrong, and hopefully if you try to tackle this work yourself, that you can learn from my problems, my issues, my concerns. So let's talk about that. Number 1. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the first thing that caused me grief in this whole work, in this whole progress, was trying to work around these struts that hold up the engine compartment lid here. I kept trying to work around it, and you'll notice on my video, I kept trying to one arm one side, or tried to fit the arms in between or around, and this thing kept, no matter what I did, always kept getting in the damn way. So what I found out working a little better was actually removing this one. Get yourself a broomstick, get yourself a snow shovel or a snow brush, get yourself something, a stick, a long enough stick, prop it from down here, jam it up in here, something like that to reinforce. But what I would suggest, and what worked for me, was taking this ugly thing off here. You pop that off, so you pull out the clip, don't pull it right off. You pry it partially, pull this away, snap. And then basically either undo it from the top as well, get it completely out of the way, or just rotate it out so it's slightly out of the road at the bottom. So you can shift it, it'll kind of fall in about there. But get this strut out of the way. This caused me a lot of headache throughout. I had a lot of bruises on my arms because I kept jamming my arms against here all the time. And I've got bruises and whatnot to show for that. So again, remove the struts. They're going to help a lot in doing this progress. And that's all in, again, we're talking about doing any work on these near the bulkhead on the front and left and right side of the car. For example, when I worked on the fuel filter. So number 2 item that caused me a lot of grief in this car, partially on taking the bracket off, but even more so putting the bracket back on. I was ready to just walk. I wanted to kick the car. I was just so frustrated because of trying to get the charcoal canister. There's that tin metal plate that goes over top that bolts it to the chassis. Well, that tin plate, number one, it's hard to see. Like, I can't even see it from over here. And if you're on the other side, how do you reach over and get it from the other side? You can't. You definitely can't get it from the back. So how do you get this? I mean, either you go by feel, which can be a bit of a pain in the you know what, but that is one option. The other option, what I figured out after a while, was instead of playing by feel, you could either do one of 2 things. You can either have a friend or a helper kind of guide you. They tell you left, right, up and down and all that. But that didn't work that well either. That was a little bit cumbersome. So what I found out actually worked for me, pardon the pink, I mean, I know it's beautiful. I used a mirror, a pretty standard little mirror that you might use in your bathroom. What I did was I just stuck it in here, like that. Now, it sits there easy, it's out of your hands, you don't need that third set of hands. Now I can work in here and I can actually see those bolts very easily, and I can actually see totally what I'm doing. That mirror sits there, don't have to touch it, but yet I can see entirely my work. So you can see it right there. Using the mirror, you can see the bracket tucked away down in there. And it actually helps immensely trying to find that bracket and actually being able to do the work down in there. You can see the bracket. Now you can feel around and you can actually know exactly where you're putting your ratchet and whatnot and the bolts. So the next thing, number 3 item that really caused me a lot of problems on this installation happened to be the actual charcoal canister itself. So we talked about the bracket and how to see it and how to get at it. It was a little difficult, but I found a solution with a mirror. The canister itself was a real pain because getting it out, even once you get the bracket off and you got all the hoses disconnected, to get that thing out of here, you really had to walk it one way, you had to walk it the other way, turn it sideways, kick it this way, turn it that way, give it a little leverage. You really had to work it out. There was no easy way. There was no just pulling it out. That wasn't going to happen. It was strictly a finesse, a little bit of tweaking here, a little bit of tweaking there. Now the worst part is not even the getting it out. That was tough. Took me, the good part of a half an hour to get that canister out of there. It took me probably an hour, hour and a half to put it back in. It was way harder to put it back in because when you put it in, you have to slide it in there, and you have to find these little notches at the back behind it, and it all has to line in perfectly. And of course, you're walking it in there. There's plastic parts on one side here. You don't want to break, so you're trying to be gentle about it, but trying to find your way in there, and you're walking it in and kind of wiggling it and jiggling it. It became very, very difficult thing to manage. Not to mention, once you get that metal bracket in place, you try to get those bolts all lined up, and that's not working out very well for you. So that's something that was a combination. Just getting that canister back in place was a nightmare. Okay, so the next thing, the fourth thing that I had a problem with, and this becomes a potential issue for any time you're working on a car, of course. I've lost tools before in the past. I've lost material, spark plugs, nuts, sockets. And in this case, what ended up losing, this piece, an extension with my 7mm socket. I ended up actually losing that, and I'm going to have to try to retrieve it later on. But it fell down somewhere. I was tightening up the clamps for the coolant expansion tank, and I ended up dropping it. It came off the socket or the ratchet, and it went plink, plink, plink. It went down into the abyss. I looked, I scrambled, I tried to pull out with a magnet, I tried to see it. I didn't even know where it went. I tried to find it every which way, could not find it. So what I ended up having to do was just abandon ship. I'm going to have to check from below next time. I'm going to pull the panel off below. There's a plastic cover here at the bottom. I'm going to have to check under there next time I get a chance. But for now, I lost the tool. That's ultimately another thing that I had go wrong here. Right at the end of the night, I was getting ready. I was finishing up the job, putting the finishing touches on the tank, and lo and behold, clink, clink, and the thing's gone. Frustration or what? So anyway, that's the next thing that went wrong. I guess my message to you would be, if you're working with tools in places like this that are tight quarters, make sure you're taking a good hand on your tools. Try not to drop stuff, because you don't know where they're going to wind up. There's nothing in here that it can hurt. There's a serpentine belt on the front end of the motor, way up at the front. But I dropped this tool down here. There's nothing down here. There's no moving parts. I'm not worried about it. I couldn't hear any clinking, any noise. I will retrieve it. I'm pretty sure it fell below there and probably just above that panel. I'm going to do that on one of my next inspections. But for now, it is what it is. It went down there. And again, if I can summarize, basically all I would suggest is when you're using tools in here, make sure you got a good grip of it. Think about what you're doing. Be very deliberate, and make sure you don't lose tools down there, because that can add an hour or more to your job if you just lose something. What if it's that one nut from that kit, from that piece that you bought, that special part, and you're putting it together, and that's the one nut, and it's a specialty fitting, and boom, boom, and it falls down. Oh, now you're up the creek. So anyway, that's the next item. So the fifth thing that went wrong for me that night, working on this and doing that filter change. Of course, when you do the filter change, you have to remove the expansion tank. I just mentioned that. But when you do that, there's this hose, there's a hose up here as well, but there's also a hose that's kind of in the middle at the bottom that shoots off that way. And so there's one of these little metal pieces you clamp your hose to. It's a little bigger hose than this. It's more like closer to 1/2 inch hose. It's obviously in millimeters. But anyway, what happened there was, when I put it back together, there's a hose clamp on there. And I tried tightening it down, and obviously it's an old clamp and probably had through a lot of heating cycles. And I was tightening it, and it felt like it kind of stripped. And then I would tighten it, it felt like it stripped. And then I tightened it. So I didn't have a lot of warm and fuzzies, and I kind of should have suspected there was a problem right away. But I snugged it up, and I figured, okay, I think we're good. So what ended up happening was, I ended up topping up the coolant tank, got everything running, started up the car, and after I started the car, ran it for a few minutes, and I'm looking down for general inspection to make sure I'm not leaking any gas or anything. The gas is the big concern. I didn't see any leaking of gas, so I know my connections were good there on the filters. But what actually happened was, I was looking down, and I could see down and below there when I was inspecting, I could see a small pool of glycol or antifreeze in there. And I'm like, well, I thought maybe that was just for me being a little messy putting the antifreeze in and draining this in the first place. But it kept looking worse and worse, and so I looked from here. I was able to just catch a glimpse, and I just underneath, and I saw a drip, 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 drip. Oh no. So I shut the car off, And I basically had to go to the hardware store and I bought a set of really heavy industrial stainless clamps that were, anyway, they're a top quality clamp, and they happen to be actually metric as well. So I slid them on there, clamped them up real snug, topped the antifreeze again, fired up the car. Lo and behold, it was holding, no more leaks, no more drips. So I actually had it fixed. So that's very important when you do an actual repair like this, whether it's a fuel filter, whether it's glycol upgrade you're doing brake fluid, or you're doing engine oil. Always test run your equipment, because you could have a leak. There's seals and O-rings, there's bolts and fittings, and you've got clamps and all kinds of things that can basically let go or loosen off, or maybe you didn't put them on properly. And if that happens and you wind up with a leak, it's better you find it in the garage in a controlled environment than on the side of the highway or on the racetrack. So always check your work, run the car, make sure you have no leaks. So the sixth thing that went horribly wrong here in this whole installation of the fuel filters again had to do again with the glycol, and had to do because of the hose clamp and the leaking of the antifreeze. But indirectly to that was the fact that what ended up happening, because it was leaking so much antifreeze all over the place, that coolant was working its way down the whole side, the headers of the engine. It's not hurting anything inside of the engine, but it was getting down the side here and working its way all over on the side of the engine headers. So basically the primary headers coming right off the motor. So what do you think antifreeze does when it hits boiling hot headers? The engine was running. Well, we had smoke. Lots of smoke. The kind of smoke that would choke out a horse. The kind of smoke that could be mistaken for a catastrophic, some kind of failure. It was ugly and it was toxic. And so what I ended up having to do was I quickly turned the car off. When I started seeing the smoke, I pushed the car outside the garage. I started up outside. I let it idle and run and smoke for another 10 minutes. And then I took the car for a drive, watching all the gauges, making sure I still had antifreeze, making sure I had good oil pressure. The car was running good. But I wanted to make sure I get some of that, get airflow through there, get that smoke going out. I didn't want to breathe in the smoke. I just wanted to get gone. So what I did was, like I said, I just ran it. And after about a 15-20 minute drive, I came, parked it in the driveway, idled for another minute, smoke was gone. So it basically cleaned itself out. And so that was the other thing. Of course, what would I do differently in that case? Well, I guess the only thing I could say is, if you had a leak, the sooner you recognize a leak and the sooner you deal with that leak, the less of a problem of smoke or cleanup that you're going to have. So always watch, and when you're doing those checks and those leaks inspections when you're running it after a repair, just make sure that you're doing all those right inspections, because the sooner you do catch that, the less of this mess and the smoke that you have to deal with. So everybody, I hope you liked the video. In summary, really, it was not really that bad of a repair. Overall, the fuel filter repair actually went not too bad. Took me some extra time because some things that I need to do research on, and then of course I ran into some snags here, as I just mentioned, and those snags being I lost the tool, so I spent some time trying to find the tool. I spent some time trying to get that canister in, because that was a very difficult thing, and I had to find a way to do that, and I hope this video helps you with that so you don't spend all those time doing all those different things. Then of course I wasted time with the clamps. It was leaking. I had to go to the hardware store, pick up material, had to pick up more antifreeze because I spilled a bunch on the floor. And so a lot of these things, time saving, and I want to save you the time. Next time you do this job, learn from my mistakes. Nothing catastrophic happened, but those are all the little glitches that actually happened during this work. And I hope I can really help you guys with that. And so if you haven't already seen that video, please be sure to check out my video on how I did the installation for the fuel filters of this 2005 Lamborghini Gallardo. I think you'll like it. It's very in-depth, very detailed, and I've yet to find a video that much detail that you can find on the internet to suggest and show you how to do this process. So, again, everybody, as usual, don't be shy. Make sure you subscribe. We'll talk to you on the next video.